So, is it possible to be 100% agile in a GXP environment, or is it a hybrid model, the realistic gold standard for executives?
Yes, I would say the more realistic approach is to have somewhat of a hybrid model.
Mhm.
Agile doesn't necessarily respect fully the fact, especially when you're talking about Scrum, when you're considering like a Scrum board and everyone in the team needs to be able to contribute equally to all the activities that are pertaining your overall set of tasks or stories in the side of you don't necessarily respect that a whole lot when you're considering an implementation on a GXP environment, right? Because a validation person is exclusively a validation person. A technical person is exclusively a technical person within the bounds of their technical ability. And pharma, specifically, when we're talking about regulatory space, it's about what is it that you're qualified to do. And there's a lot of trainings that go into place to define your role within a company and make sure that there's no interference within other roles.
Welcome to Podcast Wise Perspectives, Healthcare, and Technology. Today, we are bridging the gap between engineering speed and absolute regulatory certainty. Joining us is William Herman, a software delivery and operations leader with over 15 years of experience driving digital transformation across highly regulated industries. As an associate director of MES Professional Services, William oversees global manufacturing software delivery and agile execution for large-scale laboratory and manufacturing systems. He also holds 7 elite Scrum certifications across Scrum Alliance, Scrum Inc., and Scrum.org. In this episode, we dismantle the myth that agility and strict GXP regulation are mutually exclusive. We dive into the mechanics of validated agility, exploring how to embed validation teams directly into early sprint cycles, shift from paper trails to proactive digital logging, and deploy phased modular MVPs that protect your manufacturing floor from catastrophic downtime. If you are a C-suite executive looking to scale your digital infrastructure without risking a multi-million-dollar regulatory shutdown, this masterclass is for you. Let's dive in. Please welcome William Herman. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Podcast Wise for more perspectives on healthcare and technology.
Hey, William, what's up? How you doing?
Hello, hello. How are we doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for asking. All right, let's jump right into it. Here's an icebreaker question.
Okay.
William, in most industries, move fast and break things is a mantra. In
Yep.
pharma, break things can mean a multi-million dollar batch loss or a regulatory shutdown. How do you redefine agile for a room full of cautious quality assurance directors?
Okay, that's a lot of for an icebreaker, I have to say. I would say fail fast is definitely a mentality, but you have to create an environment where failing fast is okay within the constraints of maybe your software implementations, not necessarily the regulatory component.
Okay.
When we are in pharma companies, we have different environments on which we set up things. Before you release a software within a manufacturing floor, it goes for months, even years. In development environments where people test, play, just check how things like check the how far can I go with the bounds of any software. And with the bigger the kind of technical implementation is, the more that you kind of explore. And it's about proceduralizing that exploration and making sure that it's not devoid of like a purpose or an objective. Like you want to understand how is it that you generate value in these moments. So
Okay.
when then you go into these more validated environments, which would be like a val environment or they call it QA, and then eventually production, which do include the proper regulatory qualifications in order to get migrated into those environments. At that point, you're not testing and playing anymore. You're executing on proven things.
Okay. Okay. So, is it possible to be 100% agile in a GXP environment, or is it a hybrid model, the realistic gold standard for executives?
Yes, I would say the more realistic approach is to have somewhat of a hybrid model.
Mhm.
Agile doesn't necessarily respect fully the fact, especially when you're talking about Scrum, when you're considering like a Scrum board and everyone in a team needs to be able to contribute equally to all the activities that are pertaining your overall set of tasks or stories in the side of you don't necessarily respect that a whole lot when you're considering an implementation on a GXP environment, right? Because a validation person is exclusively a validation person. A technical person is exclusively a technical person within the bounds of their technical ability. And pharma, specifically, when we're talking about regulatory space, it's about what is it that you're qualified to do. And there's a lot of trainings that go into place to define your role within a company and make sure that there's no interference within other roles. So you have to respect this kind of almost waterfall, you can call it a V model, of you have to respect that for every activity that you do for the sake of development, there has to be a validation counter.
Speaking of waterfalls, what is the true cost, both in time and capital, of sticking to traditional waterfall methods in a modern digital lab?
It's incalculably high, I would say. Especially because if we consider how waterfall is actually presented. Waterfall is presented as a mechanism where you create an individual project team. And this project team's purpose is to see that project out of the door. In manufacturing, for example, that's not something that you can accomplish when you're trying to think about GXP systems. Your SMEs cannot leave the floor endlessly because you're still manufacturing while you're doing so. And even if you are what we call a greenfield site, which is a site that has not produced anything yet, it's being built up, you're still in the qualification process of the site itself and maybe the product that you're building. So when we think about waterfall, the fact that waterfall could never truly be implemented because you cannot fully dedicate this group of people to your goal. And the other big element, especially with digital transformation items and enterprise systems, is that you see the postmortem and what is it that you're doing wrong way too late in the game, where that's already way too expensive to shift adequately. And I think that is where the hybrid model plays well, because you have the ability to use the retrospectives that Agile has and the reviews and all of that to kind of intake what is going well, what is going bad. And then within that framework, be consistently put into this continuous improvement mentality of we have to adjust whatever we did and last sprint. And if it was all good, how can we even be better? So like
Right.
this mentality of having like a Kaizen actually was born in manufacturing, right? It was born out of the Toyota way. And it's about bringing kind of both of these mentalities together because they're not necessarily opposing of each other. That's a lot of people think.
Now, we talk about continuous integration. How do we achieve continuous validation so that the paperwork doesn't lag months behind the code?
So ingraining your validation team members as early as you start deciding what are going to be your specifications before you start building either code or configurations or whatnot, it is of the utmost importance. Because that way they're not just lagging behind and just taking every input. They're actually part of the input and they're voicing their validation concerns, their quality concerns early on in the process, which means that those will be tended to as their requirement kind of like makes it into a specification document that gets approved and validated, that then goes into the code, that then goes into our qualification documents.
Okay. Now, software engineers want speed, QA wants certainty. How do you facilitate a dialogue between these two silos that results in progress rather than a gridlock?
I think there's two things I will say. One, you have to acknowledge what each party brings into the table. They're not there to block each other, they're there to enable each other to produce the outcome that we want, which is a qualified product that serves the end patients well, in the case of pharma, for example, right? When that's why one of the reasons why I'm big on the agile part of the model, because it institutes the product owner as the centerpiece of that kind of discussion. It kind of forces the constant stakeholder management component of it all, as opposed to what you would see from like standard waterfall models where you just have people that are just checking the statuses of everything and just like hammering on whoever has the deliverable on their hands. You're actually fostering an environment where you're constantly communicating and evolving. Because the first time that an engineer would jump into the first pieces of requirements, he or she will face some backlash from QA, even if you involve them from day on. But then once, if you build on that and then build on the relationship, then you start kind of even building better and getting faster. It's
Yeah.
about long term. Like it's never with these type of implementations, you can never think short term. Let's get it quick. Let's get it fast. It's more so about truly treating it as engineering effort. And hey, you don't build a building just putting the second floor first. You have to lay the foundations, right?
Right.
So
You can't just vibe code it.
correct. You have to respect that as an engineering process for sure.
Yeah. So in agile world, the paper trail is often digital. How do you ensure your systems are audit ready at the press of a button during an unscheduled inspection?
So, for the sake of manufacturing execution systems, which is my day to day, the whole purpose of an MES system is that you're creating a digital and auditable copy of everything that you're doing on the system. So
Mm.
your batch records are a digital copy. What you're configuring to them are a digital copy of your batch records and your execution process. The master data that you have configured in the system, whatever changes are there, are logged and they have to be signed. There's principle in Pharma called Alcoa, and one of the biggest components in Alcoa is that it has to be attributable, and it has to be, you have to be able to trace it in time, you have to be able who did it, when they did it, how it was approved, and you can see a paper, like we call it a paper trail, but it's like it's a digital paper trail of everything that
Mhm.
happens between, like, from the inception of the requirement to the approval of those requirements and to the implementation of them, their qualification, and then introduction into our production environments.
So, how does a minimum viable product look like in a regulated space where minimum still has to be 100% compliant?
So this is a very common conversation that we have with customers. With the digital footprint of systems and enterprise, pharma in particular, has been big on doing big bang approaches. Let's install SAP with like these 20 modules at all of our sites globally immediately.
Yeah.
And with MES, it's the same thing. Like, let's do our entire manufacturing operation from the get go, new product, new everything. Operationally, I'm just a little bit against it. And we advise our customers to think about it differently. So, for the sake of our customers with Moda, which is the software that we use for MES implementations, we try to go for a scaled approach or a phased approach. So, there are operations that happen on the daily on a manufacturing site that are related to production, but they're not necessarily your whole production line. You could call them your equipment. They're called equipment logbooks, which are equipment calibrations, equipment management, cleaning, things like that, that are fairly simple to automate and to create automation around and digitize those processes. You typically want to start off with those. You make sure that you train the operators on the system. They get to see they get the first demo, those type of operations. They get acquainted with the system through that. And then your first kind of line of feedbacks come from those like smaller kind of items that you deliver while you're still building the big ones. But then that feedback gets ingrained into the bigger components as you go. And a lot of manufacturing sites, some of them have only one production line, so, and they have a very well defined production line, so those are fairly easy because they know exactly what they're doing. For other companies that are, let's say, like contract manufacturing companies, CDMOs, they might not know what their new process is or what their new product is going to be because they're contracted by an external vendor. So the product is going to be new. So those are a little bit trickier to manage, but ultimately you try to implement in a way where your digital systems emulate your actual processes and your engineering capabilities at your manufacturing sites. And that way, it can become almost like product agnostic, and you can essentially modularize a lot of the implementation. So it's flexible to the new things that can come.
So, when you were talking about like when customers want everything today, it made me think about like they want the stuff like Amazon Prime 2 days, like want it today, like type thing. Or when Amazon started you can get it overnight
Oh
or
yeah.
you can get it like within the next 4 hours.
Oh yeah.
It sounds like that they want it right now.
And they want all of it. They want the whole house pre-built, want it tomorrow, and all your appliances already here. You got Wi-Fi as soon as you open the door.
It's ready. It's move in ready.
Move in ready.
So for a CFO looking at the budget, why is investing heavily in automated testing infrastructure a non-negotiable for agile success?
So automated testing is not as positively seen in the pharma space.
Mhm.
You would automate how you generate the test in itself in order to test things around the product. So our product does a lot of environmental monitoring, for example, and that's the side of the system. And it automates a lot of like the readings, but ultimately provides a pipeline to definitely reduce the risk of human input and ensure that you have this digital log of everything that is occurring. Where I think in pharma, where the kind of mentality clashes, right? Is that when somebody says automated testing, they assume that the QA team or the CSV team is going to be away and these things are going to get qualified by themselves. And that's where the big difference lands, right? The qualification process, you don't want to automate it that heavily. You want to streamline it in terms of processes and how smooth the teams are operating for sure. And you want to invest in ensuring that you have the right people, the right teams in place, and then you have the right organizational model, and then you're actually being backed up by the organization to do it. But ultimately, what you want to automate are the processes at the site more so than the qualification of these processes.
So still have the human in the loop
100%.
always.
Yeah. At least for now. At least
Yeah.
for now.
Yeah. So how does software agility impact physical ster- steril-
Sterilization.
sterility assurance on the manufacturing floor?
So when we're talking about agility in itself, I kind of want to speak more so to the outcome of the agile process. So the
Okay.
agile process is typically reserved to your OT, operational technology, or your MES team. It is not necessarily something that you will see on the manufacturing floor itself. The
Okay.
manufacturing floor will stay waterfall because it's a manufacturing line. Something has to come in out of this way and it has to come out differently on the other way. Like this, that's not going to change. What you're going to see is that because you have these automations in place, that now rather than having someone go in the room and always be checking that was the temperature right across the board, or did we make sure that all the readers read the right thing, that the values were correct, that we run this math properly when we mixed this batch. Now we're having systems that are reading directly from the equipment, right? And are getting that data within a very close, very secure lab network and environment. So it's not going to be, outwardly of the company, outward of the facility or facing outwardly. You're going to have this ability to control and get all of these readings and ensure that the grading in your rooms is appropriate, that there have been no contaminations, that the readings and the parameters around your process are appropriate as configured.
Okay. So do you have like a dashboard of some sort that you can see all of this data?
100%. One of the good things that MES does is that it generates all of this data and this data doesn't leave. Like
Yeah.
you just keep this data forever. And a lot of companies, they either use built-in reports, which we have a lot of, um, to kind of get this type of information. And customers that are a little bit more tech savvy, they kind of plug in like a Power BI and stuff like that into either their equipment or the readings that these type of systems kind of generate, and they take their OEE, as they call it, and their OEE data on the equipment.
It's cool because you can go back and see, okay, well, something happened. Why did it happen? Like, was there historical data to show, the trends, right? Like, was
Y-
there like a trend, like something that happened temperature wise and it went
Correct.
down, went up, like something that you can see?
And you have to, for the sake of the customers, and regulatory agencies demand it so, right? Like
Okay.
they will knock on your door. They say, hey, like, let me check your exceptions. Let me check your deviations. Let me check the things that went wrong. And they'll start poking around because that's your job to do so,
Hmm.
to ensure patient safety, which we welcome. And that is the advantage of these type of MES and automation systems, that it is very regulator friendly, that it enforces your operation to kind of sustain a high regulatory and compliant way of operating. And because you're not you the system matches what is it that you should be doing in the floor.
Hmm.
So you are like enforced through the system in a way to also stay compliant.
Yeah, which is good. So, how do you use agile sprints to slowly chip away at legacy systems that are too dangerous to replace in one go?
So with manufacturing sites, it's always gonna be different. It's not as simply as refactoring little by little or creating new modules. When we have legacy systems, there's multiple strategies. You typically, within your increments or releases, you release a new version of the same product that might be deployed differently, and then you start using that product that moving on, and then you archive the rest of the system that way. Some ways you just version up the software, and you need to iterate in order to go through that, because sometimes when new softwares come into play, MES systems, even though that they're standard in nature, you configure them to your site's needs, right? So
Mhm.
whatever configurations you had might not play as well with a newer version, so you might need to tweak it. So when we're talking about agile, and making sure that we chip away at those like legacy systems, it's more so about our ability to continuously identify what are the changes needed, and be able to give ourselves the opportunity to explore what things work in order to make these changes. So we don't rip out a legacy system in production just like this, right? We would experiment, we would test, we would ensure that everything is fine, then we would deploy a small, um again, with a phased approach, right? You deploy a small kind of testing the waters version of that. And okay, so now we've automated that in the new system. Let's start chipping away at the rest little by little. And depending on the system, some of these can take a few sprints. Some of them can take a few years worth of sprints in order to achieve. Some of these systems are heavily integrated in how a manufacturing operation work. And, sometimes you cannot just take them away. And with MES systems and ERP systems that manage, for example, warehousing and stuff like that, I would say those are the hardest to take out of the site or decommission. Those are the hardest to kind of life cycle. There's functionalities definitely that are easier. Like if you have an integration, those happen often, or you changed equipment, or you change the type of scales that you use. Communication protocols are different. Those are kind of easier because those are like more modular in nature. But when we're talking about bigger pieces of software that are enterprise level, that is when it's almost a case by case scenario.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially for like, I don't know if in pharma they have like programming, like old school programming, like COBOL or, you know,
So
something like old,
there
really old
was
programming.
there was a period like that, for sure. But when we talk about kind of like engineering and like automation and stuff like that in pharma, there's not so much as you're a coder or a software engineer in the company. You're more so a specialized engineer on the specific type of software or automation. So, for example, there's our system, Moda, it's an MES software. You would have MES engineers at your site. They're dedicated to configure and build around the functionalities of the MES systems that you have. When you have environmental monitoring systems, you have typically your quality control or microbiology teams dedicated to kind of making that work. So you dedicate teams around the software that's going to be used. Because again, pharma is very compartmentalized into what is it that is your job function. And that's
Mhm.
why the softwares that tend to connect multiple departments are trickier to manage because the product owner serves as a more important role to make sure that everyone is aligned and moving at kind of the same pace.
Okay. So is the product owner the same as the project manager or still be like different?
So in Agile, project manager, as you call it, doesn't necessarily exist. You have a product owner and a scrum master.
Okay.
The product owner manages the backlog and manages the prioritization of said backlog in order to identify deliveries. And the product owner serves as essentially the voice of the customer and the stakeholders and make sure that organizes the backlog in order to maximize the value output and decides when releases happen. The scrum master is closer to what you would call your classic project manager, but its primary role is to ensure that the agile process is being properly followed.
Mm,
And then secondly to that, to make sure that impediments are removed from the agile team. Past that, depending on the capabilities that you have and kind of the setup that you have scrum masters that are now really getting good at data. And they're now pulling all the data from the sprints to kind of help the product owner out in review meetings.
okay.
Or in some organizations are doing now scrum of scrums where product owners get together. There's a chief product owner, scrum masters get together and they kind of align on the strategies and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
Um, you would see it's more I've seen it where it's more common for a scrum master to have multiple scrum boards, whereas a product owner will typically have the one.
Okay. So how do you maintain agile velocity when your development team is global, but your regulatory requirements vary by region?
So when you're thinking of a global implementation, if your product is meant to be global, then even if you have different regulatory bodies, you have to consider that if you're producing something in the US, if that product is going to go to Europe, it still has to abide by the regulatory bodies in Europe.
Mhm.
So you almost build it to serve everyone. Um, And with the advantages is that it's fairly easy to do so from an engineering standpoint. It's harder on the QA side of things because when they have to package the records and keep them ready for regulatory bodies, that's where the biggest differentiation I would say happens. But from an engineering standpoint, it's actually the easiest because you go just to the hardest constraint possible and
Yeah,
then you make everyone happy with it.
right. Deny all
Yes.
and then exceptions here, here, here,
Mhm.
here. Whereas with the regulatory ones, you got to make sure that that exception is for Europe and this one is for US. And then,
Yeah, like it really has no impact for us. Like when we consider an implementation, there are like slight changes. For example, if a specific region has specific barcodes or specific packaging practices or extra readings that other people would have, but those are just extra requirements. Like
okay.
we typically default to the stringiest requirement. That way it's safe across the board. But also it comes to a point where that's where you leverage your CSV teams quite heavily. Because if you're nowhere in the industry, you're not as aware. So
Mhm.
obviously you rely on them to kind of put those requirements into your backlog so you ensure that those are properly addressed.
Okay. All right. So I have two more questions for you,
Beautiful.
a little bit more on the personal insights. So you've managed complex systems across various roles. What was that one moment, aha moment, where you realized agile could actually work in a regulated space?
It came a little bit in waves. I think my aha moment was when I finally made it happen. But coming from software engineering, my background was not a regulated environment. We had worked um with other regulated environments like fintech and stuff like that, but that's a different type of regulation. And once I got into pharma, kind of my problem solving mind was going into, okay, why this is so slow? And then they started explaining, well, we have this regulation process that we need to take care of. It's like, well, but that's okay. But regulation happens here, happens here, happens here. But why cannot we like make an agile bubble here to ensure that things manifest? And I think once I got to the first organization that allowed me and kind of gave me the support to properly implement it, that was the aha moment for me and everyone involved, to be honest, because
Mm.
very little people try it. A lot of people are scared of it. And that's why I'm a big proponent of it, to let people know that it actually works. And it produced incredible results. Like everything from like bringing down deviation counts from the system to like zero from like a very high amount before it was properly introduced into production. The way that the MES engineers and the organization developed, like they developed in a way that was extremely fast because they were involved in more things rather than just keep your head down, configure the things as other people tell you. It made them part of the conversation, so gave them context, gave them
Mm.
career mobility. There's a lot of like underlying values around making sure that you allow people to work together more often in a seamless way, because it gives people perspective and it gives people the ability to contribute more often in more ways than just this is my role and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I totally agree with your statement on collaboration, right? Having different perspective. I was speaking to one of the other podcast guests about that, and they were saying that they were hiring. They were like a cybersecurity. They were a CISO, I
Mhm.
believe, and they were hiring people that were not in the cybersecurity space, right? So that like a graphic designer that comes in with a different perspective of how cybersecurity would work, right? For
Correct.
for them and in their brain, like more creative
Mhm.
brain versus, somebody that is more engineering space. So he's like, "Oh, I would rather hire in a different fields to come on my team because that way I have different perspectives in how to solve a problem."
For sure.
So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying here. So now outside the office, what is a project or a hobby where you apply agile principles to your own life?
So I've been working with a team in the back from where I was raised in the Dominican Republic. This product called Cupped. It's about coffee lovers.
Okay.
And we put together kind of like a product idea that we wanted to get out. Everyone is kind of working it on their free time as we develop it slowly over the past few years. And Agile was immediately brought into the table. And
I can imagine.
immediately there was like, I could not, like, from the get-go. And we had a lot of struggles as being like a smaller team, like in working in our spare time. And it's like, there's a degree of formalization that you can just not get to fast enough because you're working things whenever you can rather than on a very steady pace. And we had to adjust a lot in order to ensure that we could make it kind of our own. And at the beginning, I think one of the things that I learned was that I was kind of acting as both the product owner and the scrum master. And once I figured out, it's like, this is too much, especially for just something that I do on my spare time. We got a scrum master. The person was not even in tech. They were a project manager for civil engineering projects and like and renewable energy and like bridges and energy plants and whatnot. We got them in, we involved them in Scrum. They understood it. They start like making sure that the agendas were being followed, that the ceremonies were and the events were kind of like frequent and frequent enough for the team. And we're training now people and as product owners as well to make sure that we get more people kind of involved in the overall mentality as like a small kind of as a small upcoming future company type of thing. And they were and it has been instrumental in my day to day. On the more personal things, I would say it's more so related to how I view problem solving. It's
Mm.
like everything in my head now is a priority list. It's like I cannot, like, I just move the things around. It's like, okay, this is my next sprint is my week. This is what I'm gonna work on this week in order to kind of balance it all. So
Do you
yeah.
have like a Kanban board of sticky notes
For
of like,
myself, I don't have it. I have it in my other office, but I actually have a Kanban board of tasks that are written down, and I just like it's like a small one for myself, just to
yeah,
keep me sane.
I remember in one of my old jobs, one of the girls just came back from training for Agile and she had like sticky notes everywhere. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
you.
That's why I asked. I'm like, do you have the sticky notes everywhere?
I don't
Like a
have this.
Kanban board?
I used to. I have to be honest. I used to have like a board with all the sticky notes, and I will move them around. For the sake of mobility, now I have like a small blackboard that I just take with me, and I just
Okay.
write on it. But yes, and it even in times where there wasn't agile to be done in the environments that I had because there were other types of organizations, I still try to kind of agilize myself somehow, either having a Trello board for myself,
Mm,
and things of the sort. So yeah,
yeah.
I'm
Okay.
also very visual, so it helps me.
It helps. Also, like having it outside your brain.
Yes, 100%.
So, William, I thank you so much. I don't have any more questions for you. I thank you for your time, for joining me today and answering my questions. I learned a lot. So, thank you. And thank you to the Wise crew for joining us. And see you guys next time.
Have a good one. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank, thank you.
Bye.